What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bilbron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my Deep Dive series, this time looking at what might be literally my favorite spell in the game, Sleet Storm. If you ask any of my party members what Bilbron Bafflestone's signature spell is, the one that he casts more than anything else, they would probably say Sleet Storm. This is a spell that I am either casting or regretting not casting. And I really can't believe that it's taken me this long to get to it. I'm almost at 70 videos and I haven't done my favorite spell, so time to fix that. And let's take a look at this really amazing spell. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel. That said, let's take a look. So I've put the spell description on the screen so you can check it out. And a couple of things I want to call out from the spell description. It is placed at a point you choose within the impressive 150-foot range, which means that it doesn't require sight to center the effect, and you can place it behind obstacles or cover as long as there is line of effect. Now do note that the non-heavy obscurement effects do not proc immediately, but at the beginning of the enemy's turn or the first time they enter the effect, which is probably not going to happen too often. And the prone condition that is imparted by a failed save only affects their ability to get out of the Sleet Storm's area of effect. It confers no combat benefit, as under heavy obscurement all advantage effects are cancelled, and thus it will not force an immediate concentration check like a damage spell would if you are specifically trying to interrupt a spellcaster's concentration. However, Sleet Storm imposes heavy obscurement over a massive area of effect with no save. I'll provide some examples of that in a few minutes, but the area of effect is so big that you can assume that you will usually blind all of your enemies immediately, even if they are in a spread formation. Compare this to Blindness Deafness, only one spell level beneath this one, which affects one target and gives it a Constitution end of turn save. This affects everybody in a massive area with no save and just lasts for the entire battle. It is 20 feet high, so it will affect gargantuan creatures. And note that it works against True Seeing and Double Sight. It's only defeated by Blind Sight and Tremor Sense. So this is actually pretty awesome against high CR enemies, because all those demon lords and just high CR creatures and such tend to have true seeing, and they don't often have blind sight, so Sleet Storm is going to work very well as you get into Tier 2+. In any case, heavy obscurement confers a massive impact to the battle, so see my deep dive video on heavy obscurement for more information on all of that. So Sleet Storm is effective against a wide variety of enemies. It is effective against martial enemies that leverage attacks at advantage, for example wolves and such that prone, snakes and such that restrain, and invisible creatures, and it will allow the party to safely employ ranged attacks versus strictly melee martial creatures. However, Sleet Storm is even more effective versus spellcasters and a very high percentage of high CR monster special abilities. A surprisingly high percentage of such spells and abilities require sight. Notably, Counterspell, Misty Step, Magic Missile, Gaze Attacks, and the Frighten condition. Basically, most effects which call for a save will be neutralized, and most effects which call for an attack roll will work, but those typically confer only damage, and there's lots of ways to defend against that. Not so much against, say, a Maze, which normally confers no save but requires sight, so is completely neutered by a Sleet Storm or other methods of heavy obscurement. Furthermore, against spellcasters, Sleet Storm imposes a very difficult concentration check every round. It's at the spell save DC and not DC 10, and it works against Warcaster, which does not affect Sleet Storm, because Warcaster specifies that it only works when you make a concentration check versus damage. And Sleet Storm doesn't cause damage, it simply imposes the difficult concentration check. So fantastic against spellcasters and melee. So as such, lacking intel, opening with Sleet Storm is highly advisable just in terms of percentages over the course of 1,000 battles once you get to Tier 2 plus, which of course, once you get Sleet Storm, you're already in Tier 2. So yeah, use it heavily from the beginning as soon as you get it. And if anyone uses it against your own party, you can leverage this by preemptively being optimized for that, or you can Dispel Magic. Dispel Magic is a pretty awesome spell, and it will work against Sleet Storm, but it is very rare in an enemy creature stat blocks, so you're not going to have to worry about that too much when you're using it. And while Sleet Storm, even in a vacuum, is just an excellent spell, you can leverage it by optimizing the party, and you can generate extreme combat advantages. There are synergies with Blind Fighting and Alert, so I would definitely recommend that all party marshals with fighting styles take Blind Fighting as soon as Sleet Storm comes online. It's great with the Hide action. This is fantastic for casters who are seeking to protect their concentration spells, and especially good for rogues, goblins, and hasted PCs who have access to a bonus action Hide. This is one of the ultimate defenses in the game. If they cannot find you or target you, you are very largely safe from attack. It also synergizes with Careful Spell Metamagic, which you can have as a Sorcerer Dip or Metamagic Adept, and this will exclude party members from the non-heavy obscurement effects. You can also protect party members from it through Freedom of Movement or Investiture of Ice to ignore the difficult terrain. The spell is fantastic when combined with spells that constrain the environment, such as Wall of Force, Wall of Stone, or Illusory Reality. It combines very well with other effects that reduce move, such as Exhaustion, Slow, Spirit Guardians, the Weight of Sorrow ability that Summon Shadowspawn has, or the Slasher feat. It combines very well with persistent damage area of effects spells or abilities, such as Sickening Radiance, Dawn, or Cloud Kill. Sickening Radiance being particularly nasty because at level 2 exhaustion you suffer half movement. It works very well with push attacks that keep enemies within the area of effect, such as Crutcher, Telekinetic, Pushing Attack, Repelling Blast, or Big B's Hand. It works very well with summons that have blind sight, such as a Giant Scorpion, Tiny Servants, Animate Objects, a Barlgura, or a Chasme. And it works nicely with defensive spells like Rope Trick, Resilient Sphere, and Globe of Invulnerability, because then they can't see what you're doing, and unless they burn an action or a reaction to successfully make an Arcana check, they're not going to know what you did, and thus will be very much less likely to be able to muster a counterattack. Do note, however, that there is negative synergy with sight spells like Blur, Mirror Image, Hypnotic Pattern, Misty Step, Counterspell, or Fear. I mean, tons and tons of sight spells. Also, lots of sight-based effects like the Frighten Condition, Hypnotic Gaze, Chronal Shift, or Warding Flare. And it does have negative synergy with abilities that are based on gaining attacks at advantage, such as Elven Accuracy, Mounted Combatant, Fighting Spirit, or Trip Attack. Finally, I wanted to visually demonstrate the massive area of effect. This thing has a 40-foot radius, which means it covers an 80-foot diameter, and that is just huge. You can see from the two maps that I put on the screen, I've placed Bilbron Bafflestone and his Shield Guardian at the center of an effect. And you can see that even if it was an open environment with no constrainment whatsoever, that if you place creatures at the center of the effect, they cannot escape it in one round, even if they dash. It's 40 feet to the edge, and if they dash in difficult terrain, they can only cover 30 feet, and that's if they don't fall prone. We can expect about 2/3 of our enemies to fail their save, so they're going to fall prone, require half their movement to get up, and then even if they dash, they're only going to be able to cover about 4 squares. So due to the fact that an enemy formation is going to have different speeds based on whether they make their save and how close they are to the edge, this is going to break apart enemy formations and create a staggered engagement scenario, which is advantageous to the party because you can just focus on the ones that are close to emerging from the Sleet Storm and bring them down, and then focus your attention on ones that are further towards the center. Note that it's only 20 feet high, so flying enemies can get above it if they have sufficient move to push through the difficult terrain and they don't start prone. But do note that if they are in the air, you can place the Sleet Storm such that it might knock them prone, and that would give them falling damage, although that would probably take them out of the area of effect of the Sleet Storm. And ask your DM how he feels about placing it 5 feet above the ground. So if you're facing a large or bigger enemy, that would theoretically affect them and not affect you. But that might be weird because without the Sleet Storm touching the ground, it might not create the ice that confers the prone save and the difficult terrain riders. So I might not even ask him for that personally, but some people might want that as an option, and it might be better in certain tactical scenarios. So as we can see, it creates a massive area of effect that covers 201 squares, creating difficult terrain in every square. And so on the left is an example of how fantastic it is even in an open environment where you have to place enemies at the center. However, it's even stronger when synergized with a constrained environment, as we can see in the example on the bottom right. If enemies are already constrained to some degree by the environment, you can place them at the edge of the Sleet Storm, and then it's going to take them multiple rounds to escape, even if they save against the prone condition and dash. And by the way, the orange circle there is the area of effect of a fireball, so I just threw that in there for a visual reference as to how big the Sleet Storm area of effect is. And so if you can combine it with environment, it's just going to be so debilitating to enemies and cost so much in terms of actions to escape the Sleet Storm that many will just choose to escape slowly or not at all, so that they can retain their action for attacks and spells, and that just means that you are going to have an advantage. Of course, melee-only enemies have no choice but to try and escape it, because they can do nothing else as you're shredding them with ranged attacks, so they're just going to lose all sorts of actions. And so you can get any range of environmental scenarios based on the environment, including the open environment that I've shown on the left and the constrained environment that I've shown on the right. But regardless, this thing is big enough that it's going to be very difficult to escape and have a massive impact on probably the entire battle. I would say the majority of encounters are going to be in some sort of constrained environment where you can affect the entire area with a Sleet Storm if you place it properly. So that is why I love Sleet Storm. I'm a defensive-minded player, and so when I am looking at things over the course of 1,000 battles and I don't have intel and I'm starting to get used to encountering really strong monsters, I 100% want to drop the Sleet Storm right away, just in case they have some kind of devastating gaze attack or, ability like maze or whatever. I mean, better safe than sorry. And I have to say that I've been finding out the hard way how true this is, because recently in my own party we added a Conquest Paladin who has a suite of abilities based on fear. Fear requires line of sight, and so out of deference to his suite of abilities, I've stopped automatically opening battles with a Sleet Storm unless I know for sure that it's going to help us in a significant way. And it's just, every time I regret it, man. They always seem to have something that if only I'd cast Sleet Storm, it would have just totally messed up their sight-based teleport, their this, their that, the other thing. And so Sleet Storm is so powerful. It is such a good spell. If I literally could only take 2 spells the rest of the way in Dungeons & Dragons and never cast another, even though 3rd level spells are like the best ones that have, a fireball, a counterspell, dispel magic, hypnotic pattern. I mean, it's just a bajillion great 3rd level spells. But if I had to keep only 2, it's Phantom Steed and Sleet Storm. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you love Sleet Storm as much as I do? I'd be very curious to hear. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bilbron Bafflestone. See you next time.